On the 7th of November 1938, a Jewish teenager by the name of Herschel Greenspan fatally shot a German diplomat by the name of Ernst Eduard vom Reich in Paris. Within 3 days, anti-Jewish violence erupted throughout Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. Initially incited by local Nazi officials, but ultimately sanctioned by the decisions of Hitler and Germany, who were at the top of the Third Reich. Goebbels especially had a field day by allowing all his anti-Semitic sentiments to spill over. Synagogues burned and Jews were beaten in the street, whilst the police stood aside. I was a young schoolgirl in Vienna at the time. All Jewish children were expelled from state schools and sent to very inferior Jewish schools. When the news of their destination came through, we were sent home until further notice. I was an only child. My parents were middle class. We lived in a big apartment house in the lower middle class area of Vienna. The street we lived in was a quiet side street with 3 grocery shops owned by non-Jewish shopkeepers. The news of the assassination was broadcast over the radio all day at short intervals. We knew there would be trouble, but I think no one expected the violence that followed the next 3 days. With us, it started the day after the assassination. My grandmother, who lived with my grandfather in the 2nd district, which was considered the Jewish area, telephoned in the late afternoon. She told us that my grandfather, who was a dignified elderly man with a short grey beard, was commandeered by some young hooligans on his way home from the synagogue to go and scrub the pavement on the other side of the road. He was given a pail of water with a scrubbing brush and pushed down on his knees. While scrubbing the pavement, he was kicked by bystanders, jeered at, and some particular obnoxious young man pulled his beard. He was not the only one scrubbing the pavement. Apparently there were quite a number of elderly Jews doing the same and receiving the same treatment. It was considered a great sport by the onlookers. After a while, he was replaced by some other unfortunate older Jews and let go. My grandmother said that he was much shaken and vowed he would try to leave the country as soon as he found the means to do so. I should explain that my grandfather in all probability had never held a scrubbing brush in his hand. He was a scholar who spent the days studying and praying. The next day, the persecution started in earnest. The radio played patriotic songs, including the famous Horst Wessely song and other inciting anti-Semitic songs. Goebbels had a field day calling for revenge and further vilification of the Jews, and many lesser functionaries did the same. The SA and other groups marched in the streets shouting Juden verrecke, which means death to Jews, and sang the inevitable Horst Wessely song. As it happens, the day was my mother's laundry day. There were no washing machines. They had not yet been invented. Every tenant was entitled to have a washing day every 2 weeks. The laundry room was situated in the basement. It had 2 large boilers for the whitewash and 2 big wooden troughs for washing colored articles and rinsing. It was locked and the key was kept by the concierge, a kind elderly woman. Early in the morning, our laundry woman came to help my mother with the washing. They went to the concierge to get the key to the laundry room, and she whispered in my mother's ear that my father should disappear because they were going to get him. This means he would be taken to the police station, probably beaten up, and then God knows what could happen. It was all very well to say he should disappear, but where should he go? The streets were dangerous, and our Jewish neighbors were in the same position, and none of the non-Jewish neighbors opened their doors. It was therefore decided that he should hide in the cellar, which was not far from the laundry room. It was very dark there, and he could move from side to side to the other side if someone came to look for him, hopefully without being seen. The cellar was mainly used for storing coal for the winter, so it was also easy to hide behind a heap of coal. My mother decided that I should spend the day with my best friend, who lived in the residential area not far from me. The additional advantage was that her father, who was Jewish, had left the country, and she was living alone with her Christian mother. I had strict instructions to walk near the houses and try to be as invisible as possible in case one of the young fellows who roamed the streets took a fancy to me. I arrived at my friend's place without incidents and spent the whole day with her until dark. Meanwhile, my mother and the washerwoman carried on with their task as if it was a normal day. The door to our flat was locked, and there was no one at home should one of the bully boys decide to visit us. In the evening, my mother collected me from my friend, and my father crept back to the flat. Since it was still dangerous to remain in the flat, we all went to a Jewish neighbor whose apartment had already been visited by the booted bully boys. They were not taken away because the man of the house, who had fought in the First World War, showed them the Iron Cross he had earned for bravery. They did hit him, though, and called him a dirty Jew. We stayed there until late in the evening. My parents were very apprehensive of what would happen during the night. The flat was kept as dark as possible so as not to attract attention from the outside windows. We all went to bed and fell asleep when suddenly we heard boots trampling on the corridors and the house was lit up. Loud knocks were heard and people crying and others shouting. We all crowded together, not knowing what to expect. This went on to what seemed to us an eternity. It probably lasted about an hour. Suddenly all went quiet, the lights went out, and we were saved. I can still remember the fear I felt. I was shaking so much that my mother had to hold me down. The next day we heard through the grapevine that all the foreign Jewish families were taken to the police station. The radio carried on with inciting speeches. It talked about teaching the Jews a lesson of their treachery and kept playing patriotic songs at intervals. It was not safe to go out and also not safe to stay in the apartment. My parents therefore decided to spend the day with our Jewish neighbors again, since, as I mentioned before, they had already been visited by the bully boys. The next day the people were told to go back to work because the Jews had been taught a lesson they would not forget. My mother thought it would be safe to go out now, since we were running short of food, and also to see what had happened. The main streets were strewn with pieces of glass which the Jews were made to sweep up. Jewish shops had their windows smashed and were looted. The shops were empty. We heard that the owners were beaten up and taken away. Uniformed bully boys were marching on the street, singing their favorite anti-Jewish songs and calling from time, Juden verrecke. I just want to finish with a comment about Kristallnacht. By the night of November the 10th, The nationwide anti-Semitic program had inflicted massive destruction on synagogues, Jewish schools, and Jewish-owned businesses. During this spasm of violence and plunder, many thousand Jewish men were rounded up and sent to concentration camp. Kristallnacht was manipulated from above and executed from below by a large number of ordinary Austrians rioting in the street, heckling and taunting Jews and cheering on the stormtroopers.